Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Omega Metroid podcast. My name is Andy Spiteri, joined as always by Dakota Lasky. Dak, how are you doing today?
Andy, I'm doing absolutely splendid today. It was actually my 5th anniversary at my current full-time job, and
I saw that. Congratulations.
Thank you. And unrelated, I had the day off, so
there
yeah, so I had the day off, so that was nice. Been hanging out. It was a nice weekend. Got to see some friends, safely, socially distanced for Halloween. I went as Sasuke again, who I went as
Nice.
2 years ago. Yeah, because I had to put a costume together quickly, so I just opened that bag up. And I've been playing some Halo. I'm about to hopefully start my Metroid Prime 2 mouse and keyboard run on PC soon, so that'll be cool. And yeah, we've got a few things to talk about too before we even get into our main topic today, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, there's actually a lot to talk about in the world of Metroid. It seems like there's no news for a long time, and when there is news, it comes at you all at once. So let's just dive right into it, actually.
Yeah.
First and foremost, we've got some new hires from Retro Studios. They continue to bring in, just different talent that have worked on different games. So now we've got producers that have worked on GTA. I believe they brought someone in that had worked on Overwatch. So, it's almost repeating yourself at this point, but this really does seem like a who's who of, talented designers, producers, artists, you name it, that have worked on a lot of really successful video games in the past. So, it's the hype train continues to build up steam with every new hire that Retro announces.
Yeah, actually, this particular person they hired is from both Rockstar and Blizzard. So, Marissa Palumbo, she worked at Rockstar for nearly a decade. She was on the GTA 4 team, Red Dead Redemption, Manhunt 2, Max Payne 3, and then she was on Blizzard's Overwatch development team for the past 6 years. So,
I see.
Quite a caliber from her as well. So certainly,
that's quite a resume. That's hit games on that.
Exactly.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. She's worked on a ton. That's the thing too, is that everyone that they've hired have been like people who have worked on major franchises and like big games from those franchises as well. Not like a side game or some unrelated like media to the main games or whatever. Right? Like these are people responsible for some of the biggest games of all time. So I don't know. Yeah, the dream team, the super team that's being put together for Metroid Prime 4. I wish I'd done something right in my life to be part of it, but I can only wait for what they're putting together. And speaking of putting things together, they're also putting together a big renovation project, Retro Studios that is. Apparently this was reported after the hiring of Marissa Palumbo not too long after that. Retro Studios is putting in, apparently according to an investment firm or an intelligence sales firm, like $500,000 into expanding its current headquarters, assumedly for development of Metroid Prime 4, or maybe for something else, but we have to assume it's for Metroid Prime 4. So, $500,000 into where you work, that's not too bad. It's not too shabby.
Well, I mean, you keep hearing about all these people that they're hiring, and I'm thinking, like, yeah, they got to be running out of cubicles in that office. Like, so yeah, I mean, that's very, very exciting. It's kind of like the old adage of like, you want to look like the part. So like, you want to look like this big giant development studio, and then you become that big giant development studio. So very cool that they're getting some new offices, and that's awesome. I hope that we see Metroid Prime 4 soon. I feel like it's got to be close. We got to be close to something, even a little tease, even a little sneak peek. But we got to be getting close to something.
I hope so. It's been quite a ride. And also, we have to remember, too, that, like, development was restarted, right? Like, only a couple of years ago. So, I would assume that they, like, transferred some stuff over and reused some assets, if any assets were even made in the original development run. But we don't know how much longer this could take on the second development try, So, I hope you're right. I would love a reality in which I'm playing an absolutely amazing Metroid Prime 4 and Halo Infinite in 2021. We'll see. Considering how this year has gone, I'm not getting my hopes up, but
yeah, one thing that does give me a little bit of hope though is like, so I played through the Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity demo this weekend, and I was like, you know what, this is awesome. Like they announced it 2 months ago, and like I'm gonna play it in less than 3 weeks, and like part of me really actually kind of loves that, where it's like you don't have like the whole like the big long wait. Like you have the initial announcement, you can get excited, and then before you know it, it's out. And like I kind of appreciate that, and I'm wondering if maybe like part of me feels like Metroid Prime 4 is kind of too big to fit that mold of like the Hyrule Warriors or the Paper Mario where they did that, because Nintendo obviously knows how near and dear to so many people's hearts this game is going to be. But it's not impossible to say like, here's the trailer for Metroid Prime 4. By the way, it's coming out in like, it's coming out in like 4 months. But I mean, that could also work the other way too, where it's like, since it's obviously not going to be ready anytime soon, we're just not going to show you it until we're 4 months out. So I guess it kind of works both ways. But yeah, I think I got a little bit to hold me over into at least the first half of 2021. I'm going to grab Pikmin, I'm going to grab Cyberpunk, and by God, I'm going to tackle some of my backlog actually in the first half of 2021. And of course I'm going to fire up a Metroid game here pretty quickly for the next Mapping Metroid. So I do feel like I have enough to hold me over for a little while, but yeah, it would be really good to see some Metroid Prime 4. Please, Nintendo, please. Even just like a new logo or something, or just a name.
That would be great. Actually, that's the thing is I do want a bit of like a longer build up, because they can drip feed that stuff. It would be so hype. Like I've already waited this long. Like even if it if it doesn't change when the date comes out, at least like give us like the name and then like a little bit of footage like a month later. Like I'm not against the drip feed because I've already waited so long, but at the same time,
I'm not either. Yeah.
I wouldn't be against them just being like, all right, this is coming out in a month. I do think though that like I hope they would try to advertise it as much as possible. Like it's a fine balance, right? Because if the build's too long, then people lose hype eventually. The steam eventually fades. But at the same time, if it's hyped too quickly, then maybe some people who didn't get to might not be able to hear in time. So I hope they find that balance.
This is my theory. My theory is that the perfect time for like a game's announcement and like the hype train to begin and to trickle it out little by little, you should be able to conceive a baby, and by the time that baby is born, that's when your game should be coming out. Like you got that nice 9 month like from the announcement to release. Like that's a nice timeline. I think maybe a year, but like a 9 month timeline, that's long enough to like get people excited, get people talking, but it's short enough where it's just like, yeah, you don't lose momentum after a while.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think 9 months is good, though at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily be against 6 months either. I think 6 months might even be good enough. I just don't want like the 2, 3, 4 weeks kind of thing, where like it feels like they're kind of just they're shoving it out the door, so to speak. I think like 6 months to 9 months would be a nice sweet spot. At the same time, it's like it's hard because
that'd be prime.
I think it's like I already feel like so I've been following the Halo Infinite development, right, and that's been rocky. But every time I get like a Metroid Prime 4 news, even though it's not gameplay, we don't know anything about the game, I'm still like getting excited because I'm like, ooh, they hired this person, they hired that person. Like I'm like, this has to be good. Like I'm getting more excited. Like I can't wait to see it. I feel like the actual reveal of Metroid Prime 4 when it like the first time we really see it is going to be awesome. Like I'm 100% convinced. My expectations are very high. So, I think 6 to 9 months would be great. It'd be awesome if like at the beginning or middle part of 2021, they like just come out of nowhere and they drop the trailer and they're like, all right, holiday 2021 for the Switch. And I'm like, for the Switch Pro or whatever, I would be like, absolutely perfect. They don't need to tell me now and make me wait a year. I think actually, now that I think about it, I do kind of want it shorter because I don't want to wait too long. I take back what I said. I've already waited so long. Give me the game. Just tell me when it's coming out, and hopefully that's 6 months or something, maybe even less from there. I think as I've been saying this, I've realized that no, I've waited this long. I want to play this game. I don't want to wait even longer. So, yeah, I'm going to go back on what I said about 5 minutes ago. Shorter the better. Let's get this game stat. But at least the news has been good lately.
Well, hopefully we hear something sometime soon. All right, let's go from our most anticipated Metroid game ever to today's topic, which is probably the least anticipated Metroid game that there ever was. Is that fair to say, do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're
So
right on point there.
we have talked about Metroid Prime Federation Force before, and we've given our opinions and our critiques and a lot of our thoughts. And the thing about a bad game or even a mediocre game such as Federation Force is like it's easy to look back with hindsight and say what went wrong. It's easy to say like this could have been better, this could have been fixed, this could have been changed, the timing could have been different, etc., etc. But what isn't so easy is to say, well, okay, well, like, how would we have done this, and how would we have changed it, and how would we have made Metroid Prime Federation Force cool? And that is what we are going to attempt to do today. Is we're going to kind of pitch. I don't want to call it like a Metroid Prime Federation Force sequel because that'll never happen. But a reimagining of the concept, kind of like we did with the Hunters concept. I don't think that it's ever going to happen. I think that they tried it. I think that it failed. I think it's dead. But if it did, I jotted down some ideas of what I think could turn this around and make it not only a good game, but a game that Metroid fans would be into and would dig. And I know that you got some notes too. Mm-hmm. The thing about a game like this, or like a side mission kind of side story like this, is if it's good, I think that the fan base will embrace it. I just mentioned that I was playing Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, and that it's not exactly my cup of tea. It's a lot of button smashing and just kind of, it feels a little bit mindless, but the setting is so good, the characters are so good that it makes me forgive it and just embrace it. And similar, like when they released Cadence of Hyrule, is like, did I ever think I'd be playing a rhythm game? Not really, but because it had all the Zelda stuff that I love, I was really into it. So I feel like the argument that like Metroid fans wouldn't be into this. I mean, maybe I think Metroid fans are a little bit more passionate than your average fan base, but I do think that I'll go by the old mantra of like, if the game is done right and it does pay certain homages to Metroid, I think that the fan base would accept it. And I have some ideas about how Federation Force could have been handled differently, and maybe if it had, we would have looked back on it more fondly. So, I'm excited to talk about Federation Force again. I wasn't sure that we ever would talk about it again on our show after the last time, but I think that I've got some good ideas.
Well, that's the thing, is that I don't think Federation Force is even really like super bad to begin with. It's just not good. It's not like it's a mediocre, like has potential but didn't really meet it kind of game. It's not like Other M where it's like literal trash and like it has no, and you're better off just melting it in some kind of like furnace rather than trying to improve it in any kind of way. Federation Force, I think, like has a means to be reworked and redone in many different ways. And honestly, I wouldn't be against another Federation Force if done right. I just think maybe don't call it that, like maybe work it into like a new Hunters experience. But yeah, I think there are many ways to rework this game and have it be one that Metroid fans and other people too would actually want to play. So I'm sure we'll have a lot of similar ones though, but I think there's a good amount that will have a good list.
Okay, well, let's start off with the two that I'm sure are probably on the top of both of our lists.
Right.
Let's start off with the controls. The controls for Federation Force definitely held it back, in my opinion. If you're going to do this game, there's no need to be fancy. There's no need to overthink it. Dual analog has worked for 20 years with first-person shooters, and just do that. And where Federation Force got itself into trouble was it tried to be cute with the way that it controlled, because you could lock on, but then you'd have to move your cursor or your little thumbstick around and like shoot within your locked on target. And I found it like incredibly cumbersome. I think that like the button mapping was terrible in Federation Force, and the fact that you can't map any of you don't have custom buttons in that, I feel like that was a really big drawback. I think that Federation Force definitely overthought how it controlled, and I think it paid for that. The first key to success, if you're gonna make a video game, no matter how good it is, no matter if you've got the best story in the world, the best graphics in the world, it doesn't matter if it feels awful to control. And I feel like Federation Force, it wasn't awful, but it certainly didn't feel, it didn't give you that like, right in your hands kind of control feel that, even Metroid Prime 3 on the Wii would give you. So I feel like that's probably the first thing that they need to overhaul, in my opinion, is just make the controls a little bit more familiar. And, assuming that this is going to be a first-person shooter, first-person adventure type of game, that's the first thing that needs to be changed. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if they did Federation Force again, it would be on the Switch, right? So, and if you put it on the Switch, like, the dual analog is so obvious. So, yeah, I agree with that. It's very cumbersome. It feels like you're moving in mud sometimes. And, yeah, the lock-on, it's like a lock-on, but not really. It's not like in Metroid Prime where, like, not only is the screen locked on, but her arm cannon is, like, stiff and, like, is right there. Even if they, like, either that or just get rid of lock-on, but I don't think they would. I think keeping lock-on is fine. But I agree. Just, like, if it would be on Switch most likely. Yeah, just fix the controls, give yourself true dual analog. It's 2020. Not everything has to be innovative, right? Or like an attempt to be, right? Like it's okay to do things that are tried and true and established and work and are fine. So I do think that maybe because it was on a portable system that they were trying to make something work for that they thought would be more beneficial for that, how you hold your hands or what they had to work with the 3DS. Whereas the Switch definitely gives them a little more options. They could probably even include like an optional Metroid Prime 3 kind of mode, right, where you'd be able to use maybe the Joy-Cons as like a
Right.
motion control mode. Like even that I think would be better. But yeah, just fix the controls and you'd probably get at least 50% more sales, I think, right off the bat. Like just put that on the box. Dual analog,
Oh,
right,
yeah.
right there in the corner. I'd be like, hell yeah, I'm game.
And you know what? Put in options, and this is we talked about this for Metroid Prime 4, but put in options for those freaks out there that want to play with gyro controls. Like have it in a bunch of different ways. Have it control every way possible. But yeah, man, this dual analog, it's tried and true. Just don't overthink it, and I think that you'd be off to a really good start. The second totally obvious one to me is the aesthetic of the game. And
Yeah.
I think that it just sticks out so jarringly, so glaringly, and it's so. I mean, it's cutesy, and that's not really a word that you would associate with Metroid. And that can work for a series like Zelda, which has it can lean a little bit more cutesy, and each game is such a drastically different art style. But like Metroid aesthetic is fairly consistent across the board, and then you have Federation Force with its chibi little characters, and it didn't work. I don't think anybody liked it. It's a big part of what makes a Metroid game kind of tick, at least for me, is the sense of atmosphere and the sense of the ambiance, I guess, and the chibi style of Federation Force just really detracted from that for me. I don't think I'm alone in saying that. I mean, you go and Google Marine Troopers from Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. These guys look awesome. So it wouldn't take much to just go back to that old aesthetic, make it more of that traditional, real kind of world Metroid vibe that we all know and love. And I think that right there you have fans that are much more forgiving. So you make those two changes, controls and aesthetic, I feel like that's 50% of your problems right there.
Yeah, I think again this comes down to the limitations of like the 3DS, right? Like they wanted a game that would work on a portable system, so I don't know if they could have done like the Metroid like Prime style. Not like it's photorealistic, but it's not like cartoony really either, right? It does have like a somewhat of a realistic style to it. Maybe they thought that wouldn't work as well on the 3DS, and it'd be better to do the chibi style. It'd be like easier on development and easier on the system. Because maybe they'd have to allocate like in-game resources to the co-op and that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I'm not a game developer, but I would have to assume that's a part of the reason why they went with the chibi art style, because it's simpler to do. That being said, yeah, it was awful. And it was so bad too, because it was like the first Metroid game we were seeing after Other M and for a while, and I was like, yes, all right, let's give me some Metroid. And it was that. I was like, dude, what are they doing? Like, are they like trying to throw? Like, are they trying to make me hate Metroid? Because they're doing a great job. They're doing a fantastic job. But it was also at the same time one of those like, I'm not mad, I'm disappointed. I felt like a disappointed parent. I'm like, come on, man. Like I lived through a golden age of Metroid, like this can't be life. Like this can't be where we're going. And the chibi art style just it. You already knew the game wasn't going to be super serious, no matter how hard you tried. It's not like Metroid's super serious, but it does take itself seriously, and I think is taken seriously by people who play it for the most part. I would guess. I certainly do in terms of its game. It's not like a tongue-in-cheek kind of sci-fi game, right? So, yeah, like it's such a disappointment to see that, because like, wow, like, and it's an immediate turnoff, right? It doesn't even give me a chance to try to enjoy the game or really accept it. Like the second you saw those graphics, you're like, this is not going to be good. This can't be good, because like unless they pulled it out of their where and made like the great sickest chibi looking sci-fi game of all time. Like no. I don't know. That was
you nailed it though.
Yeah.
It's like it's the first impression, and
Exactly.
you can't get that back. And when you saw that, you're just like, "What the hell is this? Like this isn't Metroid. Like what gruesome looking monsters that the Metroid series is famous for am I going to be facing with my little chibi soldier here?" It just nothing about it worked. I don't think. But yeah, like I would say, so I compiled a list of a bunch of changes that I would make. But of my list, I would say, like, those were the two critical errors and the most obvious errors. The rest of it is, like, if they did it, great. If they didn't, it wouldn't be the end of the world. But I think for me, those are the two that I would label critical. Is there anything else on your end that you think is, this absolutely 100% needs to happen if this Federation Force concept is going to be a success?
Well, I would say it's personally critical. I don't know if it would necessarily be like 100% guarantee of success, but for me, I think something that would have to change is you throw out the entire story and you replace it with whatever happened to, and essentially what happens to the troopers in Metroid Prime 2. I don't understand. They have this story, right, that we kind of know what happens, but like they could have like expanded on it and taken like this story that we know of and we learn about, but like it's kind of like Age of Calamity, right? Where you kind of know what happens before Breath of the Wild. You know how it how it leads up to it. But you don't really know all the details, and it's kind of interesting to learn all that stuff. They already had a squad of Federation troopers in the Metroid Prime franchise. Why not just literally give us a story from those troopers, like the lead up to Metroid Prime 2? You could even show maybe scenes from Metroid Prime 2 itself and like take that story, expand on it, or do something like that instead of like I mean, not even to get into the ending, right? Like that was we don't need that. But aside from that,
No.
I still think like the setup for Metroid Prime, like it didn't work for me. Like it didn't really hit any notes that I'm like, wow, this is exciting, or like this is expanding my knowledge of Metroid, or it's delving into something that I know about but I want to learn more about. It didn't really do any of that at all for me. And I thought, when Federation Force got announced, even before Federation Force got announced, I always thought that would be a sick game. Is to, when like if anyone asked me like, okay, like a Metroid Prime, or if I discussed it, a Metroid game that didn't involve Samus, what would you do? That was always my immediate, my immediate idea is give us a game from the perspective of the Federation troopers on Aether from Metroid Prime 2. It's a perfect setup. You know how it ends, but like that doesn't matter because it's the journey, not the destination, and you get to play in this like squad and learn about the characters and fight against the Ing and all. Like such a good game could be made from that. So when they didn't do that with Federation Force, I was completely bewildered because they already had the setup. They already did it. They could just easily do that. And I think that would have made more people interested in the games because it would have like leaned more into the Metroid Prime-ness of it. People who had played Metroid Prime 2 would remember those troopers, be like, oh, I want to check that out. You could advertise the game as being very linked to Metroid Prime, not just in name, really. Like, and maybe have
Yes. Right, yes.
it would be very integral to the very integral to the canon of the story, and I think it would add to it very well. I wish they had done that. That for me, I think, is critical because the Federation Force story and the setup really doesn't do anything to help the game or get anyone interested. Whereas I feel like that would be something that would immediately get more people interested and would expand upon already really awesome games in their story.
Yeah, I love what you said about like it's a Metroid Prime game in name, but not really in anything else. Like it kind of exists in an island. I've got a story pitch for you later in this episode, one of what I would have done story wise to make people care about that a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I really love that. Like because it does. It feels like it exists and has no kind of connection or ramifications or relevance to anything else going on. So to me, the player, I'm just like, okay, well, I'm going to skip this because it already looks stupid and it doesn't have anything to do with the Metroid Prime that I know.
Right.
So what's the point? So yeah, and I'm going to expand on that in a little bit. But I wanted to get your opinion on this actually, because one of my on the top of my list, one of the things that I would change for Metroid Prime Federation Force, either the sequel, let's call it the hypothetical sequel, is I would have like a really, really focused single player campaign. And I would have multiplayer kind of fall. I would still have the multiplayer option, but I think that I would have that as more of like a backseat to the single player campaign. I think that multiplayer was obviously kind of the big draw of Nintendo. That's what they used for Federation Force. But I don't think that multiplayer is traditionally what Nintendo does best. Granted, Splatoon is pretty rockin', Smash Bros is pretty rockin', but if it were me, I would focus mostly on the single player campaign. I would even go back and like, if you really wanted, you could do it kind of like Perfect Dark style, where like you can maybe throw in some modes where like you can do a level co-op with someone and just ramp up the difficulty. You can maybe have like a versus mode where like you can play as, I don't know, someone attempting to take out the Marines. But like, I would make that multiplayer not necessarily the focus. Like in the main game Federation Force, you have the little flying robots that fly around you and they're supposed to replicate your teammates. I think that was silly, and like, let's just build the game around a single player experience. And I think that would, again, connect a lot more with the people that you are trying to reach, while still kind of offering like, we do have multiplayer, we do have different modes that you can do. I just feel like this, like Hunters is a better example of where you would lean in more with multiplayer, because at least you have different styles of hunters and different weapons and stuff like this, where like, a Marine is a Marine is a Marine. So like, just focus on the single player campaign and make that as good as it can be. But I say that as like a single player gamer that doesn't play a lot of multiplayer games. Like, I'm interested to see or to hear what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I definitely disagree with that. First, I mean, for me, I definitely disagree that Nintendo does single player better than multiplayer. I mean, there are tons of great multiplayer Nintendo games. You have, Smash, you have Splatoon, you have Mario Kart, you have Pokemon, you have like co-op games that they've done that are really good, like Donkey Kong and all that. Like, I definitely disagree that like Nintendo doesn't necessarily do multiplayer good or as good often. Definitely disagree with that. Some of my favorite, almost all of my favorite Nintendo games, aside from Metroid, are multiplayer games. So, disagree on that. Second, I think if you're going to do a game like this, it doesn't necessarily have to be like Hunters or Metroid Prime or whatever. It's okay to do something different, If they had never done something different with the series, we never would have gotten Metroid Prime in the first place or Hunters in the first place and all that. And then again, we wouldn't have gotten Other M, so maybe it wasn't a good thing. But with Federation Force, I like the idea of a co-op Metroid game. I think that's a cool idea. That's why I've said I would like it in Metroid Prime 4 as well, even though I don't think it's necessary for those games. But if you're going to do a spin-off, that's, I think, the best time to experiment. You don't have to do another Hunters if you don't want to. You don't necessarily have to do a game that's like the 2D or 3D Metroids that already exist. I like the idea of playing as a group of Marines in a squad in a co-op setting. Like, sure, like, every Marine is a Marine is a Marine, whatever, but it would be, I think that's when you focus on the individual characters and you actually, like, give us some dialogue, like, give us some personalities and make me care about these characters beside what abilities they have and what guns they use, right? You can always give them different guns and abilities while still making them Marines. And that's, again, going back to why I wanted to see the Metroid Prime 2 story, because I wanted to learn about those characters and all of that. To me, you could still have some really awesome gameplay without necessarily having to make each character a completely different character or making them really super special and all of that. If you write the story good, if you give them good character development, if the dialogue's good, if the setting and setup is all good too. So, yeah, I don't think I would have wanted a single-player game, because then at the end of the day, it's going to be a not as good portable single-player Metroid Prime, which is not what I want, really. If they're going to make a Metroid Prime game, put it on your main console, make it really good. Don't give me this, spin-off portable game. So, yeah, no, I like the idea of co-op. I don't think that's the issue with Federation Force at all, actually. I think that's what initially made me interested before I saw what it looked like. Actually, it was that it was going to be like a co-op, and I saw Federation Force, so I did assume that it was going to have something to do with Federation Marines in a capacity that I knew of, a la, Metroid Prime 2. So
Right.
I like the co-op idea. I wouldn't have wanted a single player game. I wanted to play as a squad and give me something new. I don't think new is bad necessarily. It just always comes down to execution.
So I kind of thought that you would say that. So I had a second part to, or like an amendment
Okay.
almost to that, whereas like I think that you should focus on single player, but I will say that maybe what I would have done is you can still control the squad, but you're able to like switch between them kind of on the fly. So let's just say that you have a single player campaign where like, three people are controlled by, like, you could almost make it like almost borderline how like RPG characters will just fight on their own for you or whatever, right? In like Xenoblade or something like that. So like you can switch on the fly between each different marine, and the key is like building single player levels that you can seamlessly turn into co-op levels. And I think that you'd have to like build them in such a way that like there are definitely spots where all four of you need to concentrate fire or like work together to do something, but there's also different spots where like you have to split up and you each have to do your own separate thing. So I think that if they were to keep that concept, I mean, my dream would just be like a good single player game, right? Because that's just the type of gamer I am. But I think that in kind of embracing that, the gist of Federation Force was like, playing as a platoon or as a squad. I think that I would want to see like really quick, really seamless interchanging between all the different team members. I hate to keep on bringing it up, but it's just fresh on my mind. So like in Age of Calamity, you can just press the up button and all of a sudden you go from Link to Impa to Zelda, whatever. And you can be either fighting together, you can be fighting on different points of the map, whatever, right? So I think that if they were going to stick with the kind of squad mentality, I would want to see maybe something like that implemented where like, if you did have another player playing with you, you can play that level together. But if you're playing it solo, it works just as well as if you're cooperating with someone else to do that. So that would be my kind of dream scenario.
No, that sounds cool to me. I feel two ways about it. I think it's a great idea. That would be really cool if I'm playing by myself and I can like jump to each different player on the fly, or different squad member on the fly. Though I would also be like, well, at the same time, if I have like my own like character that I've personalized a little bit or who I play as, and maybe I would only want to play as them. Like when you're playing like Halo Reach, for example, and you play as Noble Six, who's kind of your guy, or you play as well, the rookie doesn't actually interact with the squad for the most part, but yeah, for like in Halo Reach, Noble Six, kind of your own dude. That's your perspective, or guy or girl, whoever. That's your perspective, and that's cool because that's you essentially, right? Switch. But at the same time, I like that idea. That'd be cool to like be able to switch on the fly seamlessly and use the different characters and whatnot. But if that were the case, yeah, I still would need co-op though, because at that point I would be like, well, I should if I'm in a squad and I'm playing as a squad all at once, I should be able to have those other characters if I don't want to switch, or if I have friends to play with, be able to be played by those friends of mine. So
Yeah.
I like the idea if I don't have any friends to play with, yes, but I also would still like co-op. But that's a cool idea. I didn't think about that. Like, yeah, if you have individual characters that have like different stuff and you could swap between them. I haven't played Age of Calamity demo yet, so I didn't know that was a thing. That's a cool idea. I wouldn't be against that, no.
Another thing that I jotted down that you just mentioned, which I would want to see return, is like actually really liked the idea of customizing your suit in Federation Force. I just don't know that they took it far enough, actually. So like, I thought that it was cool that like in the levels you can find like the little CD-ROMs or whatever that have like the different like you could have your reinforced shield or like whatever, right? Like all those different upgrades and stuff. So I like that idea, and I like that you can find like maybe you could build up like your one member as like your tank. You could build up someone as like a sniper, like whatever, right? Like kind of really go in and customize your squad. I think that like leaning into that would really it would really kind of give you the connection that you didn't have with all of the Marines in the last game, because like these are essentially like your player avatars. So I'd really like them to lean into that a little bit more. It would be cool if like you could like they had paint jobs and stuff like that in Federation Force. I'd like to see that return. I think that that's cool. Maybe not hidden behind amiibo this time, but like you can unlock them in game somehow.
Right.
Yeah, I just think that like it's a again it's tried and true, but like customize your characters, and that's a way to build attachment. That's a way to spread out things in level, give you a reason to replay levels, to go and find whatever you missed before. I think that this one would be a really easy and a really smart addition.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think that'd be really cool. And yeah, it wouldn't make it feel like just a simple, okay, you play as one guy in a team, but they're all just, allies that sponge shots and, help you out and are ally characters, right? It would give it a little more depth. I think that'd be cool. I'm down for that.
So one thing that I just kind of touched on that I think is missing from the Federation Force games is like they really do kind of feel like they exist in a bubble and they exist on their own, like they're not connected. If I was making Federation Force, I would drop in some familiar faces that Metroid fans would know, but specifically I would never put Samus in this game, because I think that Samus in this game, like Samus of the world of Metroid, is the hero among heroes. She overshadows everyone and everything. So I think that in order to let our Marines breathe a little bit and kind of grow, Samus cannot be a part of this game. That was a fatal flaw, I think, of Metroid Prime Federation Force. So like Samus would be nowhere near my game. But I do think that it would be cool to have like some familiar faces show up. Like, the one that comes to mind for me is Admiral Dane. That makes sense to me, to have him maybe appear. Like, he doesn't have to have a big role, but just like something to let you know that like, okay, like this is the same universe. Like I've seen this guy before, or like I don't know, maybe like an Adam, or like, or something along those lines.
That would be good. Yes, I'm sorry to cut you off there, but like when you said Adam, I was like, absolutely. I think Admiral Dane is also a great idea. 100% agree. Yes, bring in people that we know that aren't Samus. I throw Ridley in there, TBH. Like, though.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, hell yeah, man. Like, you gotta put Ridley. I mean, you don't. All right, I will take that back. You don't have to put Ridley in this game, but I think it would be a great idea. But I think it all depends on when it takes place, of course. If it makes sense for him to be there, that's fine. That being said, if you were to do the Aether Federation Marines from Metroid Prime 2, I wouldn't be against the ending of the game being like after like the post-credit scene being like Samus, like the same scene that happens in Metroid Prime 2, like, where she shows up and all of that and finds the remains of what has happened. That I'd be okay with, but I don't think she should show up in like the actual main story, or you run into her in game and anything like that. But that would be a way to tie her into it.
I agree. That'd be cool.
Yeah,
that'd be cool. So that's funny that you just said that about Ridley, because like to me, I'll read you what I had written down here. I said that we should have more Metroid-esque creatures, because there wasn't like really a ton of them.
That's a good idea.
In Federation Force, but I think that it would be cool if like you had, and I put down like a B-list Metroid boss show up for the Marines to fight. So like imagine if there was like a Chorizo, or like there was a Ceres, or like a Yakuza, or like something like that. And I say a B-lister because, and actually I feel like Other M did this actually in a decent way, where like Phantoon is like the end boss, but Phantoon isn't like this like A++ tier level threat in Metroid that like Ridley or Kraid, or like he just, Phantoon doesn't have the name brand of a Ridley or Kraid or Mother Brain or anything like that.
Right.
And so I feel like my rationale behind like maybe one of the B tier bosses that I just mentioned is like I think that for me, I wouldn't like to see Marines go against Ridley and be able to defeat Ridley. I feel like that's just something that I just want, like only Samus is capable of that. But like if I were to see Marines go against like a Chorizo or a Yakuza and they work together to defeat them, or to defeat that monster, I could buy that. I'd be down with that. Ridley would be a little bit of a stretch for me. Maybe even Kraid would be a little bit of a stretch. But I could totally see them working together to fight like a boss of that kind of ilk. You know what I mean?
Well, I actually had this on my list as well, as you bring that up. First I'll say what I wrote for Ridley. I said, Ridley could be a boss, but you don't beat him. He gets away. So, like, the boss battle would have to work in that, like, the Marines, like, are able to hold him off, maybe, or, like, barely survive, but they don't, like, get a victory on him. They just don't lose, essentially. Like, or maybe they somehow like screw up a plan of his and like somehow like ruin something, but they don't outright defeat Ridley. He gets away, or he isn't really being close to defeated physically. He might just like foil his plans or something. I don't know. So I'm with you there. I wouldn't want to see them just straight up beat Ridley because, yeah, I agree. Only Samus should be able to do that. Second, I didn't write it nearly as you said it, but yeah, bring in bosses that aren't like main bosses, but ones that like against regular Marines would be a lot tougher than for Samus. And it's funny you mentioned Ceres, because I didn't write Ceres down, but that's someone who I was thinking of. Because for Samus, I don't think Ceres is like, an end-all be-all boss, right? Like Samus can take on Ceres and have no problem. But against Marines who can't jump as high, who don't have the same weaponry, who can't do all the stuff that Samus can do, like Ceres would be a really tough boss. So I would love like enemies that like Samus can make quick work of, but for a regular human, it's difficult. It reminds me of, and I always bring up Halo, but Halo 3 ODST, you play as an ODST who's essentially a regular Marine, so a grunt, one brute, is a big issue for a regular human. Even like a grunt who's essentially like a super small enemy for Master Chief who can destroy is almost regular human sized and can kill a regular human. Like a single plasma bolt can almost kill them. If you read the books, a single plasma bolt can essentially destroy someone's entire body or completely melt through to the bone. So yeah, I would love to see bosses who are like mini bosses or minor bosses. Maybe not Kraid. I think Kraid would be too much.
I think Kraid is too
Kraid
much
would be way too much, but like Crockmire would be I think would be a great, bring him back. Bring Crockmire back.
He'd be perfect.
And I think that would be a funny reappearance. Like maybe even make him like one of the major bosses. Like give some of these characters like time to shine as like their own major boss opportunity, right? Like, I 100% agree. That would be awesome. While I do want to see some new stuff as well, like. I thought it would be great to give, again, this is going back to what I said earlier, like give us a new perspective on things we already know. That's what I think Federation Force should have been all about in terms of story, in terms of enemies. Give us like a new perspective on things we already love about Metroids. Give us some enemies that we already recognize, but make them appear stronger and harder because you're just a regular dude, essentially, right? I'm 100% with you on that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would love to see, like, and I know that we don't give Other M a lot of credit on this show, and rightfully so, but, like, I do really like the fact that, like I said, it's fan-toon. It's not, you're not fighting Mother Brain again, or Kraid, or Ridley. It's just, like, it's this kind of, no, I don't want to say dime a dozen boss, but it's, like, this boss from Super Metroid that you don't really think anything of after you beat it, and he shows up, and he's, like, probably the best thing about Other M, so... I think that would be like really cool actually if they got like Crockmire back in there and or I don't know, maybe brought another couple bosses back from Prime 2 if we're going to do the Aether story, which I think would actually be like really cool. But yeah, I totally agree with you, and I'm glad that we're on the same page with that. I think that one thing that probably is really understated that Federation Force was severely lacking was Metroid music. Like, the music to me didn't feel very Metroid-y. And I'm not saying that we need to have every track as a remake of tracks that we've heard before, but, like, I can listen to a song and I can think to myself, like, oh man, this sounds like it should be in Metroid. And I don't think I ever got that vibe with Federation Force. So, like, I think that you need to crank up, the ambiance, the music to make it a little bit more fitting, and that would also go a long way. Do you think that that's a fair criticism?
Well, from what I remember from our Federation Force episode, our first one, like I think we talked about how there was like no music in this game or no tracks that were actually good. Yeah, I think
I don't know that it's that they weren't good. I just I can't remember any of them.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I can't even remember our discussion on it, to be honest. So, yeah, they weren't memorable. So you got to have something. Again, I'm not against new music, and I'm not against, or I don't necessarily need Brinstar, Red Soil, and every the themes that show up in every Metroid, right? I don't necessarily need that, but some of them would have been nice, like something that, like, again, recognizable. You're already doing a game that's a little bit experimental for Metroid. You're already doing something that's a little new. You got to give us some stuff that's familiar, right? You got to have something that we can latch onto and remember as something that's related to the franchise that this comes from. Yeah, you got to have some. I would have loved like, you know, maybe, yeah, bring in that Brinstar remix, right? Give us the classic stuff. I think it would have been great if they remixed a bunch of Prime tracks, right? Like remix like the Fendrana Drifts theme, or remix like the Magmore Caverns, which is, I think, in and of itself a remix. You know, like give us like remixes of some of the Prime tracks, not necessarily like just, you know, the classic 2D Metroid tracks, but remix some of the iconic Metroid, you know, maybe like the main Chozo ruins, or I love the you know, a lot of the boss themes. I could have reworked some of the boss themes from Metroid Prime and Metroid Prime 2. That 100% would have worked.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, I 100% agree. That's another thing that I also put on my list is Metroid like Prime music remixes. Like, again, give us more Metroid Prime content in this Metroid Prime game.
Like 100%. Like not even. I feel like for me, it doesn't even have to be a remix of anything, but like just give us some memorable music. Like that just goes a long way,
Right? Yeah.
To building the immersion, and you know, it's Federation Forces music is as forgettable as it gets. Okay, so I had one last thing on my list, Dak, that I want to pitch you. It's actually kind of a story idea.
Okay.
So I feel like, again, going back to this critique, that like I feel like the biggest thing that Federation Force had working against it, well, maybe not the biggest thing, but one of them, is that it did kind of exist on an island. It didn't look like any other Metroids, it didn't feel like any other Metroids, and it didn't have any connection to any other Metroids. And the connection part, I feel like, is really the most important part. Mm-hmm. You know, Halo Reach is so good because it directly kind of sets up the events of what's to come, and, you know, kind of Rogue One-esque in a way, where like that also has, it's a side story, but it has implications on the overall narrative. So like, I think that it would be cool that if you were, perhaps, I'll pitch you an idea I had. Like, if you were this Federation Marine squad, your entire mission could be you're taking orders from somebody and you are eliminating space pirates and something like that. And let's say that this game is set. Let's say that this game is set in and around, or maybe slightly after, the time of Metroid Fusion. So you can go and you're taking down all these space pirates, and you're taking down, I don't know, facilities. You're going on different missions to different places, whatever, right? You can go and like maybe eventually you find out that like, oh no, like the Federation that we're working for is actually in bed with the space pirates. That's how they got the Metroids on the BSL, and we've been basically doing all these missions, eliminating all this space pirate stuff to cover the Federation's tracks. Maybe you can have like the Marines face off against a final boss, and this is a new character, and, you know, maybe this character can pull like the old Rogue One or something like that, eliminate all of the Marines, and all of a sudden you now have a new antagonist for Samus to face in the next Metroid Prime game, in the next Metroid, like in Metroid 5 or Metroid 6 or whatever. So like you kind of, you know, you've connected it to the events of like the previous games, and you're also building and setting up for future Metroid games. And it doesn't have to be exactly, you know, like that, but I think that if you took that general gist, the general idea, that's a way to make sure that, like, you could tell people, like, hey, this is a side story, but, like, you don't want to miss this because it's going to set up the next big thing.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the actual concept of the story of, like, the Federation working with the pirates, I think is what you were getting at, and I don't know if I'm necessarily about that. My hesitation is mostly like forcing people to play, or not forcing, but putting something that's integral to the main story in a spin-off. So like I would like, it's the same thing, my same reasoning behind like you shouldn't have like a story set up for a main game or something like a book or some other kind of side media. Like you should be able to follow the story of the main games from just playing the main game, as far as I'm concerned. So like you shouldn't have to play like this spin-off to understand what's happening in the next game. You should be able to just play like Metroid Prime 1, 2, and 3, and that's your understanding for Metroid Prime 4. You shouldn't have to play Metroid Prime Federation Force to understand Metroid Prime 4, you know, hypothetically, for example. Do I think like maybe having a little background, I guess, is okay? Yeah, and I think that's what like a spin-off is best for, is like giving you background rather than like being a necessity to understand the main plot. I mean, that's like a big issue for like a lot of games, I think, and even like, you know, or movies and TV shows these days. Excuse me. Or, you know, Star Wars is a good example of that, where, or something where you got to like watch or read something that's like aside from the main movies or books or whatever it is to like understand what's happening. I mean, Halo had this problem. Halo has this, Halo 5 and some other games, like you have to like read the books and all this stuff to like understand what's happening. Like Noble, well, I guess it's spoilers, but the rookie from ODST dies in a book, doesn't die in a main game. Spoilers, so like that kind of stuff I don't like. If I want to follow the story, I want to have it just in the main games. So, and then like what were you saying, like the space pirates like are working with the Federation? Is that what you were getting at? I was trying to wrap my around the main story. Like, why would they work together?
So, well, I don't know. Let's just say let's just say hypothetically that they
are.
Maybe they got the Metroids for the BSL station. Maybe they got them from the pirates. I mean, I don't know. We can make up any reason why they're working together, and we can, if it makes sense, then that's great. But like, just something like, and I'm not suggesting that like you would absolutely have to play this game to understand like what's going on in the next game. Actually, you mentioned books, and I think that Mass Effect comes to mind for me as something that did this really well, because I'm a big Mass Effect fan, and in between Mass Effect 2 and 3, there was a book released, I think it was called Ascension, and it introduced a bunch of characters and a villain that actually went and showed up in Mass Effect 3. His name was Kay Lang or something like that. And you got a lot more backstory about him if you read the book, but if you didn't, and you just played Mass Effect 3, he still shows up, he still looks like this badass silent killer, and I think that that's like totally something that Metroid could do too, is like maybe we see this new enemy or this new figure, like almost like an assassin or something like that, or something like that, right? In Metroid Prime 4, and Samus is going up against this person, and eventually has to defeat them, and maybe we could see their origin in this Federation Force, spin-off game, where it's like, we can build up this character or this new threat as this really threatening presence that is taking out the Federation Marines, and now now if you've played this game, you could realize that this new shadowy threat is like really a badass and like really poses a giant threat to Samus. So I think that in itself would be cool. I think that you just want to give purpose to the side story, and you want it to, I think that basically what you should do, you should be able to sum up the events of the side story in like in an opening crawl, or like in a couple scans or two, and like you shouldn't have to play it. But I do think that there is value to like seeing the events unfold, getting the backstory, and getting kind of the full spectrum of what happened in this story. So I do think it's a good line, or a fine line. I think you're right. You should be able to play like the main story in the main games, but like going back to I hate to keep going there, Age of Calamity. It's a cool little side story that we're able to play, and kind of it augments what happens in Breath of the Wild and what's going to happen in Breath of the Wild 2. So yeah, I thought that could be cool. But like the general gist of it is like give the game's story purpose and meaning.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, 100%. It should definitely have meaning to an extent. But at the same time, like when you're talking about like have the build up for this villain in this game, I'm just thinking to myself, why not just have the build up for this villain in the main game they show up, right? Like if you're, for example,
but you can have both.
But then there's a ton of build up. Now you have too much build up. Like if you're gonna like give me a villain in Metroid Prime 4, for example, don't build him up in Federation Force 2. Build him up in the first half of Metroid Prime 4, and then have him be a sick badass in the second half in the game that follows, or something like that, right? Or whoever it is, him, her, whoever. Again, that's another thing for me where it's like I don't want to like play a game and then they're like this crazy badass character that like everyone's already afraid of or whatever, or there's already stuff people know and are talking about as if they know it already, and I'm like, well, wait, why? I don't know any of this stuff. Like, oh, well, it was in this game, you didn't play it. I'm like, well, screw that. Like, I should just give me the build up in the main game. I don't want to play. I agree it should have meaning, and that's again why I go back to the Metroid Prime 2, where you don't need to know the exact stuff of like what happens to that story. Metroid Prime 2 still works on its own, right? You don't need to know the exact things that happen in those Marines, but it adds more to that story by telling us what happened and showing us that experience. I don't want to have to learn something that is integral to the main story by having to play this game, and I think the build-up of a villain counts as one of those things for me. Like, if you're going to build a villain, build him for me in the main story. Don't make me play this, like, side spin-off game. Because a spin-off I don't think is meant for that, to be honest. I think Age of Calamity is different because...
I I present to you Exhibit A, Silex.
Silex, yeah, but Silex,
know,
okay, but that's different because all the build for Silex doesn't even really come for hunters. I mean, in terms of what's relevant to Metroid Prime 4, for example, it doesn't even really comes from hunters or Federation Force. I think it comes from the ending of Metroid Prime 3. And second, I also agree that I don't think that would be the best thing if most of the build-up come from those games and he's future Metroid Prime 4. But what has been shown in those games really isn't much anyway. I'm sure if Metroid Prime 4 happens and Silex is the main villain, they'll still do build-up for that character because a lot of people didn't play those games. If they do no build-up and just have Silex show up and everyone was like, oh, well, you should know who this is, I would be like, well, that's a bad idea. You should have a little bit of build-up for people who didn't play Hunters, who didn't play Federation Force. So of
course.
But that's my take on that. If you're gonna give me a villain, I would like to learn about them in the game. I don't have to play something else to understand it. I think if you do play those games, then it'll be nice. If you played Hunters and you see Silex show up, I would be like, wow, that's awesome. But at the same time, even Hunters give Silex essentially no build. I really don't even count that as he just shows up. Really, Silex could be anybody else essentially, right? Like they could have come up with any other kind of hunter, taken Silex's spot. It's just 6 characters they came up with, or 5, whatever it is. So, I wouldn't count Silex in that. And damn it.
Well, I think that we're kind of agreeing here because I'm saying that this new villain could be the icing on the cake. And actually, I actually didn't realize how similar to Silex this actually was when I pitched this until right now. But you could almost do it instead of Silex just coming in a post-credit scene and stealing the egg, you could have that final boss, or you could have that character be the final boss in this game, or maybe even a bonus boss or something like that. But just some kind of thing to tie into the next game, your next adversary, so that those who know are just oh, this guy's awesome. I saw him wipe out a bunch of Marines in Metroid Prime Federation Force, but, those who haven't played can still go into Metroid Prime 4 or 5 or whatever this game ends up being and just be oh, this guy looks pretty badass. And, the game then builds him up throughout the game. So I think
I see what you're saying. Yeah, we are getting at the same thing. I just don't want it to be a thing where I have to play it. But at the same time, I still think it would be cooler to not... If you don't have to introduce this villain, then don't. I don't think it would be the worst thing. I get what you're saying with Silex, though, but I think that's just the direction they're going with it. And I don't know, at least Silex has shown up in the main games before. Let's say if he were to show up in Metroid Prime 4, it wouldn't be a situation where he only showed up in Federation Force. If he only showed up in Federation Force and the scene was only from that, I think that would be one thing, and I would be okay, I agree. But Silex showed up in Hunters, he showed up in Federation Force, and he showed up in Prime 3. So he's had build across multiple games technically, right? It's not like he just showed up in one. But I see what you're saying. I wouldn't be... While I don't necessarily want the new villain introduced in well, I guess it wouldn't be a chibi game in our Federation Force too, right? But I don't know if that would be ideal for me. But I think that would be fine. I think that's okay. I get what you're saying. I think we are more or less agreeing here. So I'll take with that. I have one more thing on my list that I wanted to mention. Which was, how this...
I have one more thing on mine,
okay,
too.
Cool. So, the one thing that I remember about this game that I didn't like and felt very un-Metroidy to me, and I think they should change that post-haste, was the mission system. How the game's, broken up into missions, and it feels like you gotta, go back to and talk to HQ or, or Samus or whatever, right? In between and all that. I didn't like that. I felt very un-Metroidy to me. I hate how, detached everything was from one another in that kind of way. Get rid of the mission system and just make it a continuous story, right? Or at least if you're going to do missions, still make it a continuous story where I don't have to, feel like I'm resetting every time and then, look at, a scoreboard after a mission or whatever, right? If you're going to do it, in missions, if you have to. But I would get rid of that. Make it one cohesive, uninterrupted experience. I think that's what Metroid is, right? Save for cutscenes, and even those are still, part of the one fluid story. Having all the missions just felt like it made things not Metroidy. It didn't really do anything for the game, and I thought it just took me out of it. I'd finish a mission. Oh, I gotta go back to this. I gotta, look at this screen again. I just imagine you played Metroid Prime and every time you entered a new area, it brought up this menu with a scoreboard or something, or you had to go back to your ship every time you left an area or you fought a boss or something, right? And it wasn't just you keep going from that moment. That would be mad annoying. So I never liked that about Federation Force. I would just get rid of that system and make it one seamless thing for a second one.
I'm surprised to hear you say that. Actually, I'm not surprised to hear you say that. I'm surprised that I actually didn't mind it as much as I think that you did. I thought that like I could take it or leave it.
Yeah.
I think, but I thought that it was like okay for like kind of squad based missions and stuff like that, because like you finish a mission, you come back, you get deployed to your next mission. So like I didn't hate it. I wouldn't fight to keep it by any means, but I think I was indifferent to that. It was annoying though, having to listen to the commander kind of yap over and over and over again.
It was so annoying. It just took me out of it. Like, yeah, I'm with you that like it made sense for a group thing, and I'm not entirely like it's not like a make or break for me. It's not like controls or the story or whatever, right? If they kept it, it'd be fine. But that's how I felt. Like at least maybe make it so that way I don't have to like go through the same motions every single time. I mean, there's like 15, 20 missions in the game, right? Like there's a bunch. It's different than like starting up a new chapter of the campaign.
Oh yeah.
But
well, I'll tell you what. If they stuck with the mission based gimmick, I would say like for God's sakes, you have to have more than 3 planets that you can go to.
That too, yeah, absolutely.
Like, you have to make it a little bit more diverse than that. But yeah, you know what? I agree. Like I agree that I could definitely see that. It's definitely immersion breaking, and maybe it's just in my case that I was so like unimmersed in Metroid Prime Federation Force to begin with that I just didn't really care. But I think that if it was done in a way similar to Metroid Prime 3, where like you went back into the ship and like you selected a new planet, that wouldn't be horrible, because at least it's quick, it's easy, and you can do it without any chatter or with anything like that. I think if they did it like that, I'd be okay with it. But I do agree, kind of reflecting on it, where like I wouldn't want to go back and get like mission briefed every single time by commander or whatever. But yeah, I agree with that. My last thing is no more soccer, for God's sakes.
Oh, blast ball.
God,
you don't like blast ball,
get
man?
Get that out of here.
What's wrong with
that?
Blast
horrible.
Ball? What's wrong? What did it do to you?
It's horrid. It's keep that in Rocket League. We already have a cool Samus car, which is great. But yeah, get that out of here. I'm all for multiplayer. You put in a nice Capture the Flag or King of the Hill or something like that. That's fine. But like, get this soccer gimmick out of here. Come on, come on.
I'm not gonna lie. I actually think Blast Ball needs to return. Give me Blast Ball 2. I think Blast Ball was probably like I remember when that came out. I think they showed it. If I remember correctly, this was the 2015 E3, and they showed it like 1 or 2 days before the actual game at the Nintendo World Championships, whatever it was called, right? That they were having. It was like one of the games the players had to play, and I think I remember it being like, "Oh my god, this is the new Metroid game they're making. It's just a soccer ball game." But then obviously they showed the rest of the Federation Force. That wasn't much better. But I actually don't think Blast Ball was a bad idea. I just thought like it wasn't great in terms of execution. But I don't think that's a bad. I don't think it's a bad mode. It was a fun it was something that could be a fun little time waster, 5-10 minute plays. Like,
you know what Blast Ball is a mobile game.
Yeah.
That's a mobile Nintendo game.
Yeah,
right
I think if of all the things that Federation Force did wrong, I'm not gonna knock it for Blast Ball. They tried something different. They tried something new. Was it kind of silly and dumb? Yes, but I don't know. I have a little soft spot for Blast Ball, so I wouldn't want that killed. But if it didn't return, I wouldn't lose sleep over that either.
Maybe it's just because I was about as good at Blast Ball as I am at Metroid Prime Pinball, but yeah, delete for me. Okay, well that's all I have for my Andy Spiteri's list of things I would do to make Federation Force cool. Anything that you want to throw in there before we get out of here, Dak?
I would say I think if they're gonna do another Metroid Prime or because I know we've talked in the past about like hunters and like. Should that be part of like Metroid Prime 4? Should it be its own game? And I think like you are on the side of like make it its own game. I think if they were going to do something like Metroid Prime Federation Force 2, maybe like put that together with a Hunter's experience, right? Like release Metroid Prime 4 on its own, and then release Hunters with like Hunters 2 with like Hunters multiplayer, and then like Federation Force co-op campaign. I think that'd be a cool idea if they're gonna bring it back. Again, it's one of those things. It's not Other M where I never want to see it ever again or any hint of it. But the actual idea of Federation Force, I don't think was bad. It just came down to like their design choices and the execution. I think the fundamental idea behind it is not bad. So I wouldn't be against it coming back. No, I think Federation Force gets a little too much hate for what it is. Is it a not very memorable, mediocre kind of game? Yes. Is it horrible? No, I don't think so. I think it had some cool ideas. I think it's totally reworkable. I mean, we just sat here for an hour and gave like a bunch of ideas that would immediately make this game like I think like a 9 out of 10 at least. Like it would be a pretty solid game if you did what we were talking about. So it's not like Other M where it's completely irredeemable and 100% can't be fixed no matter how much you try. So yeah, I think that's how I'm sitting on it. Federation Force is also, I think, a victim of its timing, too. I think if Federation Force came out during, the Prime days, in the early mid-2000s, I think would have been received a lot better, and probably would have, I think would have been better for that time. Like, Federation Force feels like a game that should have came out 10 years ago, as far as I'm concerned. Like, in terms of how it plays, in terms of, like, how it looks, and, like, how it fits in the games. It doesn't seem like a game that came out in like 2017 or 2015 or whatever it was, just because it looks like doo-doo at times, but also kind of plays like doo-doo too. And had it come out in maybe 2005, 2006, I think would have been people would have been easier on it, because those, even Hunters had some issues being released when it did. Had Hunters been released 10 years later, it would have been a way better game too. So yeah, I think Federation, I'm glad we revisited this, Jesus, because Federation Force definitely has potential, had a lot of potential, didn't live up to it, but could have, and I think we definitely showed, at least discussed, that it could be improved in a myriad of ways to make it at least not a very middling game.
Well said. Very well said. I agree with all of it. It could have been cool, but it sadly will probably never get the chance to. I would love if they did Metroid Prime Federation Hunters, something like that. That'd be so cool.
That's a title right there.
That'd be so cool. Maybe we can come back and revisit this concept in the future, but that's for another day. We're going to get out of here. We hope that you guys thought that this episode of Federation Force was cool, and let us know what you would have done to make this game better than it ended up being. Let us know over on Twitter at Omega Metroid Pod, and you can tweet at us individually at Spiteri316 and at DaxCity_. We're going to get out of here. Thank you guys for listening, and make sure that you are checking us out over on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, Google Pods, wherever you get your podcast. Go and like and subscribe to the Omega Metroid Pod. If you want a sweet Metroid discount, head on over to the Metroid Database store. Enter our promo code OMEGA for 20% off anything there. You can get yourself some good stuff. We will see you back here next week. Until then, everybody, take care.